And here we go. Good evening, everybody. Tuesday nights, we always try to bring you our super special guests, and this week is a very special night. Tonight is already the 10th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat, Yud Shvat, which is a very special day in the Chabad calendar. It is the yahrzeit, the day of passing of Rebbetzin Rivka, that is the wife of the fourth Rebbe. It is also the yahrzeit of the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who passed away in 1950. Later this week, Shabbos is going to be the 13th of Shvat. Look, Meir, I forgot already. Today's learning is dedicated to the memory of Bilha Bas Abraham V'Dvaros. Yeah, I told you I remember, then I forgot. So this Shabbos is going to be the 13th of Shvat, which is the yahrzeit of Rebbetzin Shterna Sarah. That's the wife of the fifth Rebbe. She came to the United States. She's actually buried at the Oil in New York. And her son, who was, we call him the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, he passed away in 1950 on the 10th of Shvat, tonight and tomorrow. So it's a very solemn day in the world of Chabad. And in particular, Chicago has a very special connection because 80 years ago, in 1942, this week, the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who had come to the United States to relocate permanently, came back to Chicago for a second visit during this week. So I thought, not just talking about somebody, as we often do, in a remote or unusual place, but we decided, let's go right to the source. Let's go right here to our local shliach, Rabbi Meir Moscowitz, to discuss and talk about the history and share some insights and stories about this momentous visit from the previous Rebbe, especially this year being 80 years. That adds another little special quality to it, and the fact that it is literally during this week. So Rabbi Meir Moscowitz, thank you for joining us. It's Yud Shvat. It's a very special day in the Chabad calendar. It's a busy time, and people are doing extra learning and so forth. So we thank you for taking the time. And let's start at the beginning. Why did the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, why did he come to Chicago?
Good evening, Rabbi Epstein. Great to see you, and great to be here. So, as you mentioned, 80 years ago this week, the previous Rebbe came for a second time to visit Chicago. Now, just to give a little context, the previous Rebbe came in 1929, 1930. He was living in Latvia at the time, and he came for 11 months to the United States. He visited many cities, from Washington, D.C., all the way to St. Louis and Chicago. He was here for many weeks in 1930. In 1940, the previous Rebbe moved and settled in the United States, but it was a very different time. He was weaker, he was not healthy because of whatever he went through. So at that time, he wasn't really traveling. But he did come to visit Chicago. It was something that was talked about for many months. The trip was delayed, and ultimately he came on the 7th of Shvat. Why did he come to Chicago? So Chicago at that time was a city with many, many Hasidim, or descendants of Hasidim. There were 5 large shuls of Nusach Hari, shuls that the daven and the Chabad custom. Most of them were, again, Jews or children of Jews that came from Europe. The shuls was the Nusach Hari shul, which is the precursor of the Beis Menachem shul. It was a continuation of that shul. And there were many, many Hasidim here. There were many that were connected to Lubavitch. And there was even a thought that they would move here. So there was a very strong connection. And they asked him for a long period of time to come and visit Chicago.
So who were the they? Who were the Hasidim who were here? Chabad Hasidim? Were they Chabad Hasidim? They were just sort of connected with the previous Rebbe. Do you have a little bit of that populace that you can share with us? Maybe somebody here is related to them or knows of them. Like, can you give us some names? Who are the people and what were the numbers like when we talk about Chicago having a Hasidic community in 1940?
Well, today when we hear a Hasidic community, we think of people with a beard and a hat. walking around the neighborhood, kind of like Borough Park, Crown Heights, or West Rogers Park. It was very different then. And that was actually one of the two, it was Jews coming into a new country. And the attitude was, we have to, thank God we survived. Let's forget about the past and let's become Americanized. Let's live here as we would live in a new country. America is different. That was the attitude. So the previous Rebbe, and he writes this, he talked about this, and he expressed what was the purpose of his visit. Number one was to help the Jews in Europe during the time of the Holocaust. Terrible things were going on back at home. Home meaning both Russia with their struggles and Poland, where the previous Rebbe had left just before that time. So to help to raise funds, awareness, and support for the purpose of the visit. And the second purpose was to inspire the Jews in United States, in Chicago, and to impart with them the message that America is not different. The famous statement of the previous Rebbe, America is nicht anders, America is not different, and inspire them that they should reconnect to their heritage, which could have been themselves in the previous country, and it could have been their parents when they were in that previous country.
Okay, so lay out for us, what does the geographic layout look like for the Jewish or the Frum or Orthodox community? And do we have a rough idea? It's not in Skokie, it's not in Northbrook, it's not in West Rogers Park. It's where is it? Where does the previous Rebbe go? Can you give us at least a little bit of a sense of what his itinerary looked like? And what was the reception like? What was the reception like for this, like you said, full-on Hasidic Rebbe Tzaddik with the full beard and so on, in a place where that was not common 80 years ago?
Well, you could get a little flavor of the excitement that was surrounding this trip by seeing what was in the newspaper at the time, both in the Jewish paper, the Sentinel, and in the Chicago Tribune. They had little articles about this from New York, reception planned. Throngs of Jews greet him at Union Station. So you get the feeling that there was some excitement building. On a personal,
that's the same Union Station that's the Stolia today.
That's the same Union Station. Union Station. 7th of Shvat, actually, just like this year. Sunday was the 7th of Shvat. My grandfather shared that at the time, he remembers that visit. He was a student in the Talmud Torah and the Hebrew school, and he remembers the preparation. Rabbi Hecht prepping the boys that the Rebbe is coming, we have to be in our best behavior. And actually, he doesn't remember seeing the Rebbe at the time. So he's not sure if he called in sick that day or what happened. He was just a young child, but he remembers the excitement that was going on at that time. There was another Jew who passed away just last year, who was one of the founding members of the current Chabad community in Chicago. And he remembers seeing seeing as a child the previous Rebbe at that visit. And
who was that? You cut out there for a second. Who was that you mentioned who passed away?
Mr. Kosovsky.
Mr. Kosovsky, of course. Okay.
And he remembered that, and that had a tremendous impression on him. And he would share how that guided him in his as he grew older, and he established himself and became a lamplighter, a Chabad Chassid himself.
Now, the previous Rebbe's trip here, we alluded to, it was cut short because his mother, the Rebbe Shirna Sarah, passed away. And, in those days, you didn't just jump on an airplane, you took a train and so on. Can you give us a little bit of what his itinerary was like? And I want to sort of transition there because we know that his trip was documented. It's published in a separate booklet, and it's only one of two, as far as I know, booklets in the Chabad world that have the name of a city. There is a oft-discussed academic essay called the Adaita Moskva, which was said in Moscow, and Bikur Chicago, the visit to Chicago. And you undertook a project to have that translated into English. So I know it's a lot of stuff, but can you walk us through a little bit about that and then maybe speak about that project of translating it? And just to do a shameless cross promotion here, if you look at our YouTube channel, there is an entire series the women's programs did on this book, an entire book about the visit of the previous Rebbe, now available in English wherever fine books are sold, and on Mrs. Epstein's class on our YouTube channel. So, Rabbi, can you give us a little bit of that, the itinerary, and about this book and its translation project?
So I'm going to get back to the book in a moment, but it's not available in all stores because the first print was actually almost sold out. So you could still find it online. You could get it from Rabbi Epstein as well, but it's not. It was actually sold better than expected. But we'll get to that in a moment. The trip, and this is pretty interesting. It was cut short. Not just his mother passed away, so he has to go back. But it wasn't that he couldn't find a flight, an hour later to fly back. He could have. His mother passed. Found out right after Shabbos. He could have left Saturday night or Sunday morning, but he stayed an extra day or two. Why did he stay? So the local rabbis, and this is very unusual, the local rabbis told the previous Rebbe, your visit here is so important for Yiddishkeit, for Judaism in Chicago, that we need you to stay an extra couple days. And even though you have to go back, and even though this is unique circumstances, your mother passed away, we're asking you to stay another day, at least meet with us. So if you look in that volume that Rabbi Epstein mentioned, the Bikur Chicago, both in the Hebrew and in the translation, there's an outline, the timeline of the visit. And you see here, he arrives on Sunday afternoon, as we mentioned. There's that evening, there's a large crowd that gathers in the hall, and he recites a Meir, a Hasidic discourse, one of the 3 Meirim that he recited while he was in Chicago. On Monday, there was another group that visited him. There was a group of rabbis and leaders that visited him, educators, and then there was what we call yechidus, private audience. Individuals went in to meet with the Frierdiker Rebbe, with the previous Rebbe. There was a delegation of the Merkez Harabanim, that was the body, the organization, association of rabbis in Chicago. And on Sunday, there was a banquet scheduled. That was the purpose of that banquet was, as I mentioned, the awareness and funds for the Jews in Europe. So that was, the previous Rebbe did not attend. As someone that's and his mother passed away, he cannot attend. He didn't attend, but he wrote a letter in honor of that event that was read on his behalf at the event, but he wasn't actually there. But he continued on Saturday night and on Sunday to meet with individuals, especially rabbis and educators, and then he left back on Sunday afternoon. Now, what was he telling these rabbis and these educators? Now, I don't know if we know what he had in the private audiences. There's not. I didn't see any recording of that. But he talks about the theme that America is not different. He talks about the theme of education, importance of proper Jewish education on the foundations of Torah. And one example you could find in that in this volume is that there was this abridged Chumash that was popular at that time. It was basically a polished version of the Chumash, and there's a lot of difficult stories if you learn from the beginning, from Bereshis. So they abridged it, made it more modernized and more politically correct and easier to swallow. And the previous Rebbe was very upset that they're using that type of study, because study of Torah has to be done in the authentic way with the original source. And if it has to be translated, it should be a translation that's true to its original. So that's just one example that he was sharing, that even though we are in a new place, and even though there's a new mindset, but that doesn't conflict the foundations of Torah. So if you read the actual talks, it's written in a very strong type of language. The urgency of the moment. But if you look at the description, which is also published in that book, one of the rabbis gave a little description. There in that description, it's much more emotional and heartfelt feeling of this. We're coming together. We're here together to support ourselves, to support our brethren in Europe. It was a very Hamish, a very heartfelt type of gathering. And he also references his trip from 12 years earlier, coming back here, and we talked about this then, and I'm talking about it again. So it was a very, it was an important visit, and there was these three discourses that are more Hasidus, deeper ideas of Hasidus, and then there's the talks, and published in a booklet in Hebrew called Bikur, Chicago, which means visiting Chicago. It's a small booklet with maybe 80, 90 pages in Hebrew. And my father was always excited about this publication, about this sefer, because as a Chicago boy, grew up here, was the shliach here, he felt a strong connection to it. So he had things available in English. Go to Chabad.org or go to Google, and you'll find everything in English. In those days, I mean those days of 80 years ago, I mean 30, 40, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it was not available. So my father had one of the Meirs, one of the discs. When it was the 30 years ago, when it was the 50th anniversary, he had the other two Meirs translated into English, so that's a total of 3 Meirs. Rabbi Epstein was involved in editing those translations, and they published a little booklet of those Meirs. So, you know, we always heard about this, and that I felt that the Chicago connection. So I said, well, what's the next step? Is we have to get the whole book translated into English, and the whole book means the talks and the diary describing the event, and there's some letters that he wrote referencing that trip. The letter that he wrote to share at that gathering, at the banquet. There's also in the Hebrew booklet, in the final edition, but there was a introduction that was not published, that just gives insight into some of these new ideas. You know, if you haven't learned Hasidus and you open this book, there's a lot of new concepts there. So there's an introduction about that. So to put it all in one volume, translated in a easy to read English. So I thought this would be an appropriate thing to do, both in honor of the Chicago connection and also in memory of my. I got to work on that. I was in touch with Rabbi Yonah Avtsin from Crown Heights, who was one of the involved in the publications of these books. At the time, he was ill, but he started the process together with the publishing house of Chabad. Then he passed away, and his son, and we completed the job. Just a little anecdote that while this whole process was taking place, and you know, when you look at a finished book, it doesn't look like a big deal. But while the process is happening, there's a lot of people involved, and edits and costs involved. So at one point, there was you know, the puzzle wasn't completely
coming together.
And I happened to go through some papers in my father's office, which I did not know of before, that he wrote a letter to the Rebbe. Here is the translation of the Meir. I want to translate the whole book. And the Rebbe writes back to him, he should speak to Kahas, which that's the publishing house in New York, which by divine. So it was a sign to me that I'm doing the right thing. And the book was published. you see Mrs. Epstein had a class for a number of years, and they just, I believe this week, completed studying the entire volume.
The
So,
audio is available on our YouTube channel, so you can go back and listen to it, and everyone can learn the book.
well, that's proof that it was a good endeavor because it's being studied and learned. And I want to just share one additional point. The radio, the Chod Shabbat, I don't know if there was so much flexibility to go overtime, but here maybe we have a little bit more
Sure.
flexibility. But there's the previous Rebbe's son-in-law, which is our Rebbe, was in New York at that time, did not come on the trip. But in his diary, he writes that when the previous Rebbe came back to New York after this trip, he shared with his son-in-law a very powerful statement. And he says to him, that even if someone has self-sacrifice, Mesiras Nefesh, you still need a zchus. You still need a gift from God, a blessing, that it should work, that it should be successful. And thank God this trip was successful. This is the Hebrew word of hazaza. That means they were moved. The people in Chicago were moved. This had an impact. And that's how he described his shortened trip, because it was cut short. It was barely a week, the trip. But he tells his son-in-law that this trip was successful. It had an impact. The impact we feel today, what the movement, the effect of that trip is our conversation now, and all the inspiration that followed till this very day.
Well, our group here tonight is representative of that. We have representatives here from Chabad in Gurnee, all the way in the north. We have, of course, people from Chabad of Skokie here, Highland Park, of course, the Northbrook people, Beis Menachem people, and all the way down to Chabad in southern Illinois is represented here. We have from north to south and east and west, and graduates of Pater and the Masifta and Lubavitch Girls High School. So, Rabbi, take us from, and as briefly as you can, you mentioned, of course, Rabbi Hecht, who was the first shliach, your father, blessed memory, Rabbi Schusterman. How did we go from the few Chassidim who were here in Chicago and the previous Rebbe's visit, and this Hazazah, this movement of the people that today, Kanai Nahara, we boast over 50 full-time Chabad institutions and people who are connected with Chabad, like we mentioned here, from Gurnee down to Carbondale and every point in between, in east and west, in Highland Park and Northbrook and Niles and Wilmette and Skokie and Evanston and all throughout the city of Chicago and so on. Give us a little bit, a timeline, if you could, how the previous Rebbe's impact 80 years ago, when there were just a few Chassidim, a few people who knew who he was, and how here we are 80 years later that we can see the fruits of that event.
You know, when you plant a tree, there's tremendous, but you don't see it. Only years later do you see the fruit. And once the tree starts giving fruit, and then following year of fruits, and again and again, so you enjoy it, and it's easy. I mean, we have it easy today. We have so many resources, so much infrastructure. It's all here. So it almost seems like it was always this way. But if you look back, and I happen to read today a letter that the previous Rabbi wrote during the same time period that he was visiting Chicago. So he writes to someone, George Oscar Kaplan. I don't know who that is, but some Jew in Chicago. His name was George Oscar Kaplan. And he writes to him that, thank God, a year and a half ago, with much effort, together with other rabbis, we were successful in Jewish school, a parochial school in Chicago. And you get the impression that there was tremendous, each institution, some of it lasted and some of it was up and down until it became permanent. Tremendous effort went into that. And that's what we call Mesiras Nefesh, the self-sacrifice. And like we have in the Meirs, tonight is the night when the Rebbe, our Rebbe, assumed the leadership by sharing this this concept 71 years ago that we're the seven, and our job is to bring God down here in this world. But we don't set the seventh generation is not in a vacuum. It's built on the sixth and the fifth and the fourth. So they did the heavy lifting. They had the self-sacrifice. They literally gave up everything to make this happen. We have the fruit from the tree and make a blessing and eat it. We just got to do it. We have it easy. So you know, sometimes when it's so easy, you don't even bother with it. So we got to just do it, of course, and that's our job. But the foundation is something that was established by the previous generations, and you ask anyone that was around, which that generation is getting smaller, but it was a whole different world then. I mean, ask my grandfather. He'd tell you that when he moved to Rogers Park, there was no private home that had a sukkah. He had to find one synagogue to use their sukkah. But it's a different world today.
A different world today on the shoulders of giants. Thank you, Rabbi Moscowitz. Really appreciate your spending time with us, especially this week. Special anniversary, 80 years. And it was really a special blessing because, as you mentioned, when the previous Rebbe relocated to the United States, the only trip he ever took was here to Chicago. In 1929, he did travel around the world and around the United States, but Chicago has that very special schus. There is the diary and with the lessons, the teachings, touching a city's soul, Bikur Chicago, the visit to Chicago, translated into English. So we thank you for sharing that with us. Remind people it's the special day, Yud Shvat, which is the yard site, but it's not a sad day, but because we commemorate and we relive the message of the previous Rebbe. We relive the way that that generation brought Yiddishkeit to these shores when people said, no way is it going to make it in America. And 80 years ago, they were looking like they were right, and Chassidus was going to wither and just be some remnant that you'd read about in the history books. And here we are, joining together to speak about the Frierdiker Rebbe and his continuous impact on the world through his son-in-law, the Rebbe, the Shluchim, Rabbi Hecht, Rabbi Moscowitz of blessed memory, and what they did to bring Hasidus, like we mentioned here in our little group, really represents the Chabad house impact from north to south and east to west. Reminder, tomorrow night, in honor of Yud Shvat, there's going to be a Farbrengen hosted at B'nai Ruvain with Rabbi Jacobson from Toronto. Hopefully there'll be some Zoom information, which I will certainly pass on. And Thursday night, we'll join for our Parsha discussion as well. Rabbi Moscowitz, thank you. Yasher koach to you for all that you do. Good night to everybody, and we'll see you certainly Thursday night. And again, hopefully tomorrow night, I'll have Zoom information for you as well. Good night, good night, good night.
Good night. Thank you.
All my friends.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.